それではそろそろ始めたいと思います。
Thank you very much for waiting, ladies and gentlemen.
皆様ご準備の方よろしいでしょうか。
I assume everyone is ready to begin. Once again, thank you very much for joining us today. Now, we'd like to begin the 7th webinar of the COVID-19 webinar series, COVID-19 and Climate Change. I have an honor to serve as a moderator. My name is Makoto Kato, member of the Board of Directors, Overseas Environmental Cooperation Center, or OECC. Today's event is being held under the Program for Supporting Facility for the Implementation of the EU-Japan Strategic Partnership Agreement. This is a webinar series. This webinar series began on June 11th. The first keynote seminar was held on June 11th, and so far 6 webinars have been organized. In the first webinar, the keynote seminar took up COVID-19 and green recovery, and this webinar attracted a lot of attention. We also heard very strong messages from Mr. Koizumi, the Minister of the Environment Japan, and Mr. Virginius Sinkevicius, who is European Commissioner for Environment, Oceans and Fishery. You may remember those strong messages. Today, we are taking up the issue of climate change, which has much relevance to green recovery as well. As you know, we have UNFCCC, which is playing a central role in addressing the climate change problem. In 2015, during COP21, the Paris Agreement was adopted, and the target was set to keep the global temperature rise well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and to pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase even further to 1.5 degrees. For that purpose, another target is to aim to reach global peaking of greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible and to achieve net zero emission in the second half of the 21st century. The Paris Agreement went into effect only after 1 year of adoption. And during 2020 and 2021, many countries are reviewing their domestic policies and planning for climate actions, meaning that this year and next year, in each country, the fully fledged implementation of the Paris Agreement is just about to begin. One important point about the Paris Agreement is usually international convention is a commitment between states. However, the Paris Agreement puts a lot of heavy weight and focus on cities, local governments, the academia, as well as citizens. Such non-state actors as players are considered very important by the Paris Agreement. Each one of these players is expected to address this climate crisis. And they are promoting initiatives to enhance climate resilience and decarbonization. We now have a different crisis, which is the coronavirus pandemic. Under these crises, what kind of a future vision we can have? And how can we overcome the coronavirus pandemic and climate change at the same time? We need to seriously discuss this and take actions. Against this backdrop, we have 4 speakers from Japan and also from the EU. Now I'd like to introduce these 4 speakers, and please say a few words of greeting so we can see your face through the video. After the introduction, we'll have the presentations from each one of these speakers. First, Ms. Keiko Segawa, Deputy Director General, Global Environment Bureau, Ministry of the Environment, Japan. I am Segawa from the Ministry of the Environment, Japan. Thank you for this opportunity. Very nice to meet you all. Ms. Segawa, nice to meet you. Now, Mr. Jacob Workman, Principal Advisor of DG Climate, European Commission. Mr. Workman, would you say a few words?
I'm very happy to. Thank you very much, Keto-san and colleagues from Japan and from the EU. very pleased to be able to join you for this conversation today.
よろしくお願いいたします。
Thank you very much, Mr. Worksman. Now, Mr. Gustav Landau, Head of Environmental Administration and Planning, City of Stockholm, Sweden. Mr. Landau, would you say a few words?
Well, I'm very happy to be invited and share some of the experiences from the city of Stockholm, and I'm also very happy to hear from your experiences as well.
ありがとうございます。大変楽しみに
Thank you very much, Mr. Landau. We are looking forward to talking to you. Finally, Ms. Eriko Yakushiji, Director General, Climate Change Policy Headquarters, City of Yokohama. Ms. Yakushiji, would you say a few words of greeting?
マイクをお願いします。はい。
Hello, everyone. I am Yakushiji from the City of Yokohama. Thank you for this invitation.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much, Ms. Yakushiji.
これからですね、
Now, without further ado,
今取り組んでおられる
we'd like to have a presentation session to talk about the latest state of climate actions.
一番初めに環境省の瀬川恵子さん
First, I would like to invite Ms. Keiko Segawa, Deputy Director General of Ministry of the Environment, Japan. Over to you, Ms. Segawa.
Thank you very much. My name is Segawa from MOE Japan. Do you hear me all right? Thank you very much. So this is a seminar between the EU and Japan. So let me start. Today, I'm going to talk about the link between the recovery from COVID-19 and climate change. And I would like to particularly focus on the platform for redesign 2020, which is a ministerial meeting. And I would like to share with you the results, as well as the cities and the municipalities in Japan, what kind of roles they play, because they play diverse roles in climate change. Next slide, please.
Yes, thank you very much.
The next slide, please. The next one. Thank you. At first, I would like to talk about the platform for redesign 2020. And I'd like to talk about this platform or the website. As for the necessity of such a platform, COP26 has been postponed, and it's very important that we maintain momentum towards COP26. And this is the strong focus put by our minister, Mr. Koizumi. And in April this year at Petersburg Climate Dialogue, he proposed that platform. Purpose of this online platform, twofold. First of all, even during the recovery process from the coronavirus pandemic, we need to share information about the policies regarding climate change and the environmental degradation. And the parties to the UNFFC should talk about what they can do, and also they should be given the opportunity to have dialogue on policies related to that. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So on September 3rd, this online ministerial meeting was held in Japan, and the UNFCCC Secretariat co-hosted this meeting. 197 countries participated, were invited. All the member states, all the state parties to the convention were invited, and the UN Secretary General participated through the video message. And the Japan's Prime Minister and the Antonio Guterres, UN Secretary General, sent us the video messages as opening messages. Next slide, please. And at this meeting, we held 3 sessions. Session 1 was a panel discussion. Key horizontal issues were talked about by experts. In addition to Minister Koizumi, Dr. Stair from WRI, and then the Ms. Robinson, representative of the elders and former president of Ireland, and new CEO of Global Environmental Facility, Mr. Carlos Rodriguez, and the COP26 financial advisor, Dr. Mark Carney, as well as the executive director for the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Dr. Vera Songwa. And there were very important remarks made from different representatives from EU, Mr. Franz Timmermans, and also from member states like Germany, Netherlands, and Poland, and Italy also sent us some very important messages. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yes, thank you. 46 ministers and vice ministers participated in this meeting. And as we recover from the pandemic, 3 transitions are important, and that was shared recognition. That is the transition to decarbonized society and to a circular economy and to a decentralized society. And our minister calls this a redesign of the policies. And one of the important issues in them is the zero carbon cities, which are now being promoted among different countries, cities. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yes. Yes. There is another slide before this, but as the next step for the online platform is the next step for the online platform is to analyze the information that was gathered on this website so that that can be fed back into different meetings of the Convention on the Climate Change, as well as other international organizations. And going into the second part, roles of the cities, and the 2050 zero carbon cities, the Yokohama city was one of the first proponents of this campaign, and Minister Koizumi takes every opportunity to address the governors and mayors and high-level officials, encouraging them to facilitate decisions toward decarbonization by 2050. Next slide, please. So as of today, 152 local governments have announced their commitment to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And let me give you the idea about how large it is in terms of the population. It is 71 million people, which corresponds to 56% of Japan's population. In terms of GDP, it's the 3.3 trillion US dollars. Next slide, please. So, to support these activities is one of the roles of the state. And in the next year, we are now considering the policies to further support these activities of the municipalities. One of them is the policy guide. Later today, Yokohama City will present their activities, and they are leading such efforts. But this policy dialogue that we are now considering will not be a guiding document for the Yokohama City because they are so advanced, but for other 150 cities, it's very important because some municipalities are really trying very hard how they should implement their activities towards a net zero carbon by 2050. And another important aspect is training. In Japan, is very much prone to typhoons and heavy rains. So it's very important to supply the renewable energies at the municipal level. And then there are many companies who are now providing such energies to local governments. So in the next year's budget, we are now considering the budget allocation for providing and training of human resources. Next is that the city-to-city collaboration program. Japanese cities and municipalities are pushing forward excellent activities. And then we have this city-to-city collaboration so that the solidarity and cooperation among the cities can be promoted. Next slide, please. Thank you. And this is called the city-to-city collaboration program. The basic concept is to transfer the knowledge and experience of Japanese cities regarding low-carbon society. For example, how the tourist cities can become more green and low carbon, and how to manage the city itself and make the city itself low carbon. And in order to transfer Japanese cities' knowledge and experience in these regards, the Japanese government will try to match up the cities and leverage the expertise and experiences of the private companies. Next slide, please. And this program is participated by many cities, 36 cities and regions from 13 countries. And the 14 Japanese local governments are transferring their experiences to those cities. And the Yokohama City has been working with cities in Vietnam and Thailand. Next slide, please. If you'd like to have further information, you can refer to these sites that are described here on this slide. So that's it from me. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Segawa. She's talked about the online platform. This was announced by Minister Koizumi during the first webinar, and this was actually materialized. We'd like to come back to this online platform topic later on. Now I would like to introduce the next speaker from the European Commission, Mr. Jacob Worksman. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Kira-san, and let me also express my appreciation to our Japanese colleagues, but also our delegation in Tokyo and our colleagues in Brussels for helping to organize this event. Also, having listened to Keiko-san's presentation, I want to express my appreciation for the efforts that Minister Koizumi and the Japanese government have made to establish this online platform, an opportunity for countries around the world to share how it is that they are ensuring that as they recover from the COVID crisis, they are also addressing the challenges of the climate crisis as well. The platform provides an opportunity for transparency so that governments can share what they're doing, information sharing so that they can learn from each other. But also we feel a very important point for accountability. The platform is open to the public, and every citizen can see what its government has told the rest of the world it intends to do, and hopefully in the course of events, hold them accountable for following through on those commitments as well. So I wanted to describe today as a contribution to our discussion the European Union's response to these two crises, the crisis of climate change and the crisis of COVID, by describing a bit the European Green Deal and how we hope to align that Green Deal with a green recovery from COVID. It's a description of multi-level governance, which I think is a theme of today's discussion as well, a response to climate and COVID that must engage all levels of government and all stakeholders as well. Those of you who follow the news from Brussels, and I won't assume that all of you do, will have heard some important announcements last week when the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, gave her State of the European Union address. And in that address, she proposed that the European Union move from its current target under the Paris Agreement of an at least 40% reduction of greenhouse gases from 1990 levels to a new and more ambitious target of at least 55% emissions reductions from 1990, and also announced the Commission's plans to codify in law the European Union leaders' commitment to be climate neutral by 2050 through something called the European Climate Law. Now, having been ambitious for many years, we feel, and leading the fight against climate change as the EU, how is it possible that we can, even now, in the current circumstances, move to raise our ambition yet again and even further by an additional 15%? So with the next slide, I want to begin to describe what's happening within the EU from a regional perspective. I'll then move on to say a bit more about what's happening at the local perspective. So in terms of the regional perspective, next slide. The reason that the EU, I believe, can continue to push for higher ambition is because we hear the voices of demand directly from the European people. And part of this is the fact that the EU is beginning to experience very firsthand the threats of climate change. This image of a forest fire in Greece encroaching upon a tourist resort where many Europeans enjoy spending their summer holidays, I really think gives a good sense of how the climate crisis is being brought home to citizens around the world through seeing the predicted impacts of climate change actually happening within their own communities and affecting their own lifestyles. Next slide. But European citizens are also beginning to appreciate and experience the benefits of climate action. And this image from the European countryside showing that even small villages are beginning to employ and deploy renewable sources of energy, and in doing so, ensuring their energy security, perhaps even creating independence of their households from the electricity grid, is an example of how European lifestyles are improving through this kind of energy security and energy independence, but also through the benefits of clean air and improved public transportation. So this exposure to the risks, but also experience of the benefits, I believe has provided a strong base for the European Union to act to serve both global interests as well as local and national interests. Next slide. The science also is becoming clearer, and this is developing a groundswell of demand from all sectors of European society, but most recently and most particularly and sharply from the youth. And I believe this has been happening in Japan as well, that students from school where they're learning more about climate science and recognizing that if we don't act now, it will be their generation and the generation afterwards that suffers the most from the impacts of climate change and is deprived of the benefits of a cleaner and more sustainable society. And so this is also part of what the European Union is responding to as we raise our level of ambition. Next slide. Most recently, this demand for more action was reflected at the end of last year with the election of the most progressive from an environmental point of view European Parliament, which is represented here by a few of the members calling not just for more action on climate change, but more action on other aspects of sustainability as well, including a more circular economy where we reduce consumer waste and ensure that we're protecting the environment in that way as well. Next slide. And of course, it was this European Parliament that appointed Ursula von der Leyen as president of the Commission, who brought in as her platform what she felt was a reflection of what it was that European citizens and European voters wanted, which is the European Green Deal. And let me turn briefly now with the next slide to explain a bit more about the European Green Deal. Essentially, the European Green Deal reflects a realization of where it is that the European Union economy needs to go in order to contribute to achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement of avoiding a 1.5 degree Celsius global average temperature rise. And that in order to do that, we have to bring our emissions across all sectors, the sectors described here, and all greenhouse gases to net zero emissions by 2050. And this chart shows the pathways that we're beginning to explore to get there. Two quick observations. The pathway is a very ambitious one with a very significant decline in emissions across all of these sectors and gases. But you'll also see that it begins to rely more and more as we move into the future on our ability to remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere through carbon dioxide removal, part of which will be provided by that green band at the bottom of the chart through the enhancement of natural carbon dioxide sinks, through the way in which we manage our agricultural sector and forestry, but it will also begin to rely on new carbon removal technologies represented by the red band at the bottom of the chart to ensure that the EU is moving not just to become the first climate neutral continent by 2050, but to move towards being net negative in terms of our emissions by 2050. Next slide. So we know where we need to go, and we think we know the policies of how to get there. We need to invest in the modernization of the EU economy, and we have to do it in such a way that achieves all of these policy objectives listed here in terms of improving energy efficiency, investing in renewables, etc. On the basis of the analysis that the Commission has done, this will not come as an overall cost to the European Union's economy, but in fact will bring benefits. And we believe that we've modeled the impacts of these policies that will, in such a way that will enable us to achieve an 8% additional increase in our GDP as a result of moving to net zero greenhouse gas emissions. And this will mean more growth in the economy, more growth in jobs and opportunities. And will also bring more of those co-benefits that I mentioned before in terms of energy security, improvement in public health, etc. Next slide, please. This means a further decoupling of growth of GDP from greenhouse gas emissions. We have already been on that path for over a decade now, but as this chart shows, it, in order to achieve the avoidance of 1.5 degrees, we and the rest of the globe will also have to achieve that decoupling of economic growth from greenhouse gas emissions between now and 2050. Next slide. I won't get into the details of the European Green Deal, but here are some of the central elements of it. We need to transform the EU's economy to make it more sustainable in the future. That's the real push on new environmental goals and objectives, but we have to do it in such a way that leaves no part of our society behind. So we have to ensure that there is what we call in the EU a just transition from where we are now to where we need to be. And that means, for example, making sure that communities within the EU that are currently dependent upon fossil fuel production or on technologies that in turn depend upon fossil fuels are not left behind, that they are supported as part of that transition with new opportunities for jobs and protections of household incomes. So this means addressing coal farmers in Poland, as well as those involved in the automobile manufacturing industry in Germany. We make this commitments under the European Green Deal, both to express EU global leadership, and that's the global dimension of what it is that we're trying to do, but also as a way of engaging and supporting European citizens. And that's an approach that you see at the bottom right-hand corner of the European Climate Pact, which I'll touch upon briefly in a moment. Next slide, please. This just shows that the European Green Deal is more than just about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It has important other elements of sustainability, including reducing toxics from our environment, protecting biodiversity, improving the sustainability of our agricultural sector. But the focus of our discussions today is more on the greenhouse gas challenge and the global warming challenge. Next slide, please. So as this plan, the European Green Deal, was being rolled out by the European Commission, we, and of course the rest of the world, was hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. And the Commission was asked to look again at the Green Deal and ask what role it could possibly play in the obvious effort that the EU would need to make to ensure that we recovered rapidly from COVID-19. And the logic that emerged from that analysis was essentially the same that lay behind the original Green Deal. And we have concluded, and our leaders have endorsed the concept, that the European Green Deal remains the growth strategy for effectively addressing the health and the social and the economic crisis that has emerged from COVID-19. And we believe that continuing to invest in the same way, but even a larger scale, in the European Green Deal is the best path forward for us. And as a result of that, the European Union has come forward with a new set of policies to ensure that we will have the additional resources necessary to invest not just in the Green Deal as originally framed, but in a Green Deal now packaged as an economic stimulus to bring us out of the COVID crisis. And this will involve the deployment of the combined weight at the European level of 1.8 trillion euros over the coming years. And we will ensure that at least 30% of that spending is climate relevant, and that all of the expenses made at the European level are consistent with the Paris Agreement and do not undermine environmental objectives, that they do no harm. This is just the portion of resources that would be spent at the European level. Obviously, member state governments will be spending even more than that on their own economies, but they have pledged to do that consistently with the Green Deal as well, and have agreed to a governance framework that will track the recovery plans to make sure that that is the case. Next slide, please. And then, as I made reference to before, we are maintaining the commitment that we made in the Green Deal to increase our ambition. And just last week, the Commission came out with a 2030 climate target plan proposal, which is the proposal to raise our current at least 40% emissions reduction target to at least 55%. This is a proposal from the Commission. It has to be approved before it becomes European law by the European Parliament and our Council of Ministers and Leaders. And so within a very short compressed period of time, we will now seek to make sure that that target is formally adopted by the EU and all of its institutions. And we're hoping to do that by the end of this year, 2020, so that it is consistent with what we committed to doing under the Paris Agreement, which was to review and update and enhance our Paris Agreement target by the end of this year. This will just be the beginning, the setting of the target. In the coming months and year, we will then be rolling out all the revisions to current legislation that will be necessary to achieve this ambition. And that means, for example, amending the European emissions trading system, as well as our renewable energy and energy efficiency policies, mobility and transport, et cetera, in order to make sure that we have policies that are aligned with that new level of ambition. Next slide, please. This will be codified in a European climate law, and here are set out all the essential elements of that law, which will essentially make sure that that 2030 target is binding under law, that the climate neutrality objective is binding under law, and then also sets up a governance structure that will allow the Commission to develop and track European overall emissions against a trajectory towards that 2030 target and towards that climate neutrality objective by 2050. Next slide, please. So now moving from the regional perspective very quickly to an individual and local perspective. Next slide. We wanted to touch upon two aspects of European policy that are being rolled out at the moment. One is something that we call the European Climate Pact. I mentioned that before. This is essentially a big effort to ensure that as we begin to design the implementing legislation for that new target, we are engaging stakeholders and citizens to express their ideas and creativity to help in that design, but also obviously to build in their ownership of this new level of ambition as it is rolled out. The pact will also seek to build upon and to link to existing initiatives, particularly moving from the citizen level to the local level and through this umbrella organization that we have within the EU called the EU Covenant of Mayors, which directly links to what we'll be discussing today. Next slide, please. The EU Covenant of Mayors is essentially an effort to bring together local authorities. It includes more than 9,000 cities within the EU and towns across all the 27 EU member states, representing 2/3 of the EU population. These are mayors who have stepped forward to lead on many issues, but in particular on ensuring that we achieve these ambitious climate change goals within the EU. Next slide, please. The EU Covenant of Mayors helped to inspire a global Covenant of Mayors, which brought together a number of collaborations around the world at local authority level. And this, in 2016, launched what we now call GCOM for short. This is a global network of leading cities from around the world. It includes 27 Japanese cities, one of whom we'll be hearing from today. And it helps to provide very inspiring examples of action of what countries are doing through their local authorities to achieve their climate change goals. And I think in particular, the climate neutrality target by 2050 has been an inspiring milestone for local authorities to aim towards. Next slide, please. And then now moving from the local, from the regional and local back up to the global perspective, just a sobering note. Next slide, please. If we look at what countries have pledged to do on the basis of what their local authorities have encouraged them to do and their citizens have encouraged to do so far, what we can see from this analysis from the United Nations Environment Program is there remains a very significant gap between policies as currently described, including the current nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement, and what we need to do in order to achieve the Paris Agreement goals of limiting global average temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. The current lines show that we are beginning to flatten out emissions globally, but those steep pathways that are necessary to achieve those temperature targets are way off where we currently need to be, leaving what is predicted to be a 32 gigaton gap between emissions reductions, actual emissions reductions, and the needed emissions reductions by 2050. So while there's a lot of action happening within the EU and other countries around the world, and COVID-19 has opened up an opportunity to accelerate those actions, we are still far off from where we need to be. So let me then conclude with that and to say that with the last slide, thank you very much for your attention. I'm sorry if I went over a little bit in terms of my time, but I hope that the approach that I laid out does help to emphasize European values and European principles as we address these twin crises of climate change and COVID. One of which is multilateralism. We work through and loyally with our partners under the Paris Agreement. The second is the principle of subsidiarity, a principle that we talk about a lot in the EU, which is that decisions need to be made at the appropriate level. Some are obviously like setting regional targets appropriate for the Commission to take the lead on and the European institutions to agree and to implement. But many of the decisions that will be key to achieving those regional-wide goals will need to be made at the member state level, the national level, and very importantly for today's conversation, at the local level as well. That principle of subsidiarity is key. And then finally, environmental democracy. And this is what we're really reflecting through the European Climate Pact. the need to make sure that our decision-making processes are transparent, that they're participatory, and that they allow us to be held accountable for the choices that we make by our citizens, by our voters. And so those principles of multilateralism, subsidiarity, and environmental democracy, I hope, were expressed through the various responses that I just described. So with that, I'm looking forward to hearing more from other levels of governance to see what progress they're making, but also what challenges they're facing and how we can help. Thanks very much.
Waxman さん、ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much, Mr. Waxman. Thank you very much for a very well laid out presentation. So we just heard the presentation from the Japanese government and from the EU.
プレゼンテーション、ナショナルレベル。
These two presentations deal with the issues and activities at the national level as well as the local levels. And what was characteristics was that the climate neutrality in the latter half of this century and the zero carbon cities, these are the very big trends that both governments are trying to achieve. And in that process, it's not that the economic activities will decline, but rather they are trying to achieve both the climate action as well as the economic prosperity. And the stakeholders, for example, the cities and their citizens and municipalities, and their engagement is very much needed. That was also emphasized in their presentations. In relation to the coronavirus pandemic, these initiatives were already going on by those municipalities. However, but this pandemic has accelerated the need for pushing forward such initiatives still further. Now, let us hear from two cities from Europe and Japan. First, from EU, the city of Stockholm. We'd like to hear from Mr. Landahl, head of the Environmental Administration Planning at City of Stockholm.
Okay, I will try to just make my presentation available. Do you see my screen now? Can you?
Looks like it will take a little bit more time because we are now seeing your screen.
You see my screen now? Can you see Stockholm, my title? I'll try it again.
はい、お願いいたします。
Yes, please do so. Please try again.
Okay. I am screen sharing, it says.
はい、今共有。
Yes, now we see your slides. Thank you.
Okay. Well, once again, thank you for inviting me. I will tell you a bit about what we have done in Stockholm, but also what we are planning to do in our new climate action plan, but also touch a bit on how COVID-19 has affected this work. And here in the first slide, you see our City Hall. That's where the decisions are taken and where we won't have a Nobel festivity this year because of COVID. Now, if we go to the next slide, do you see the next slide now? Or, there we go. Do you see the next slide?
はい、見えてます。
Yes, we see
Okay,
the slide.
thanks. Here you can see the actual emissions in Stockholm since the 1990s, calculated in the same way all the time. The way we calculate is we look at all the energy we used for heating, for electricity, for transport, both aviation, takeoff, landing, ships, and road transport. And we calculate this with the emission factors for the fuels they are using. As you can see, the emissions from heating but also that we are only using renewable fuels now, but also some waste. We have taken away all coal heating, all oil heating, and mostly we use wood chips, but then we also use some of the household waste, which there is still some emissions from the plastic. If you look at electricity, there has been an increase in the use of electricity during this period. It's not in the households, but for offices and shops. But the emission factor for electricity is on its way down. So this is no big issue. We use the Nordic emission factor. If we use the Swedish, it would have been even lower, but we are connected with the other Nordic countries, so we feel it's the best to use the Nordic emission factor. But then on the top, the yellow one is from transport, where especially road transport is the big challenge. And as you see, even though our emissions have been reduced by some 50% during this period in absolute figures, road transport has been stable. On the other hand, the city of Stockholm has grown by some 20% in number of inhabitants. So the emission per capita has gone down from 5.4 to 2 tons per capita, which is the latest forecast. It's 2.2 here. But transport has now become the biggest challenge, and I'll get back to that. We have our climate goals. Our long term is to be a fossil-free city by 2040, to completely get rid of the fossil parts of energy, and also be a climate positive city. We have already started taking bioenergy carbon capture and storage. We have started to take out the carbon out of the emissions of our cogeneration plant, and we are negotiating with other countries for the storage underground of this carbon. So that's why we want to be positive as well, and by 2040. We want to be with our own organization, that is the city's own services, our own public housing, buildings, etc. We want to be a fossil-free organization by already 2030. So that's 10 years ahead. We think we should be ahead of what everyone else within our municipal borders is doing. And on the short term, we want to go down from the about approximately 2 tons per capita we have now to about 1.5 tons per capita to 2023. And why so? Well, we see that there's an increased need for speed in bringing down our emissions. And we have now handed out a reduction assignment to the different boards within the cities up to 2023. And then for the long term, we have put a decision by the city to not emit more than 19 million tons more ever. That is our part of the Paris Agreement. It's a climate budget where we say that we don't want to emit more to the atmosphere than 19 million tons. Now, if you remember, I said we are emitting about 2 tons per year today. It doesn't mean 10 years and then stop. It means that we reduce this in an orderly way. For the assignments per committee until 2023, this is how it's split on different parts of our local government. The city executive board has pretty much of it. It's 221,000 tons. Much of this has to do with the transport related issues, where they also have to work very hard on getting the national government of putting some more issues into place so we can work more efficiently with bringing in alternative fueled vehicles and electric vehicles. Then we have the Stockholm Exergy, which is our main provider of district heating, where we have another big part. If you look at the use of heating, we are also driving this. We have a reduction target. When you build new on city-owned land, we own 60% of all the land within our municipal border. We require a maximum of 55 kilowatt hours per square meter. That's including hot water heating and building electricity, which is 30% lower than the national building codes. We can do this because we own the land. Otherwise, we're not allowed to go further than the building codes, which is sort of stupid. We would think that the building codes would be like at least getting down to those levels, but we are not permitted to go further. But since we own the land, we can put in these requirements in our contracts with those who procure the land or have leaseholds. All the city boards must reduce energy use by 5%. And then when we renovate buildings, we reduce by 30%, because then you have you do a lot with the buildings anyway. Here is our latest plant for the largest cogeneration plant. It uses up to 13,000 cubic meters of wood chips per day to produce a very large part of the district heating required for the city of Stockholm. It also produces about 1/5 of all the electricity we use. But we are also using new market solutions to use heat. It's like we pay for heat provided by data centers or refrigerators at grocery stores. If they feed in their excess heat into the district heating system, they get paid for that excessive heat, which is a new market solution. I should also mention that much of this is not just because of what we're doing on the local level, but we have a very progressive carbon tax, which makes the use of fossil fuels not so very economically viable. It actually makes using wood chips less expensive than using coal or oil, and this really helps move the movement towards reducing the emissions very effective. When this was introduced, we didn't have the yellow vests like they had in France, because the tax on labor was reduced as much as the taxes on carbon went up. So it was a tax shift, and everyone accepted that much better. Then we have the big challenge, and that is transport. Here in our climate, our plan, we have both goals on reducing transport by moving over to better modes of transport, like public transport, more biking, more mobility as a service modes. But we see that this will probably be the smaller part. The kilometers driven, even though the city has grown, has been rather stable. Although during the past years, the people coming in from adjacent municipalities on the national highways has increased a bit. Here we see that in commuting to work is not a big issue. 80% go by public transport, most of the others cycle or walk. The big challenge is people's travel during leisure time, or when they go shopping, when they do these trips where they first drive their kids to a sports event, go shopping, collect their kids, go back. In this case, public transport is not so very efficient for the families. So here we see that we need to work even more on introducing alternative renewable fuels and also electric vehicles for those transports. And also here we can see now, as I said, I would mention that the COVID has affected the way of transport quite a lot. At the moment, people are avoiding public transport because they don't want to cram up into the public transport. They go more by car at the moment to avoid public transport. And then the goods transports have increased even more because people are procuring very much of their goods on the internet, and these come as delivery services. Not only goods, but also very much of the food people are buying is now delivered up to your front door in your apartment building. So here we have seen changes. And this is important to also address, and we hope that people will go back to going by public transport a lot more after COVID, but maybe some of these delivery services, instead of people driving away shopping themselves, can be a virtue in reaching our climate goals. Today in Stockholm, about 30% of the fuel used for transport is renewable. That is a high level. We have quite a lot of bioethanol. I'm sorry, the slide is in Swedish, but we have bioethanol, both low blends and high blends. We have biogas. For every 100 people who use the toilet, it's enough to drive one person in a car per year. But then we have also started to use very much hydrogenated vegetable oil, HVO. It works exactly as the normal diesel in the diesel-powered cars, but it is completely renewable. And it comes very much from pine oils and from agricultural rests. Now here we see there's a big problem in the change. We're working to get more electric vehicles, but even though if a large proportion of the people are buying electric vehicles, there's still a lot of vehicles left. Vehicles continue driving for maybe 20 years. That's the lifetime of a car. And we have to find alternative fuels to substitute fossil diesel and also get more people to convert to ethanol fuels to be able to bring down the emissions in the speed required. And here we have problems with European legislation, thinking that some of these agricultural produced fuels will be a big problem if you look at the life cycle assessment. On the other hand, 40% of EU's budget is going to agricultural services, and we have very much derelict land where the farmers are paid for not growing anything. Maybe some of that could be used for growing biofuels instead. So I think that cities can do a lot to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, and sometimes, as I showed, national in the case of our building codes, or supranational in the case of the use of biofuels, can create restraints on what the cities can do. And I think we have to look at these restraints and try to get rid of some of them so we can focus even more on quickly bringing down the emissions. Because in COVID-19, we have seen what power national governments and local governments also can, how quickly they can act, and what force they can actually act when you have a feeling of a big problem. And let us see that this sense also can be used for creating action to reach the Paris Agreement. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you
very much, Mr. Landau. Thank you very much for your very encouraging message towards the end. There are things that can be done by cities working together with the central government as well as the EU. And as Ms. Segawa already spoke about, I think your idea of the city of Stockholm is very close to the idea of redesigning mentioned by Ms. Segawa. So Stockholm is taking on a lot of new challenges. Very encouraging and very interesting. Thank you very much. Now, I'd like to invite Ms. Yakushiji, Director General of Climate Change Policy Headquarters of City of Yokohama. Do you hear me? Yes, thank you. Ms. Segawa gave us, the City of Yokohama, a lot of praise. This has put the hurdle for my presentation very high, but let me give you my presentation on the actions taken by the City of Yokohama. Next slide, please. So this is an overview of the city of Yokohama. The population 3.74 million. This is the second largest city in Japan after Tokyo. And by 2050, we would like to become zero carbon city. Zero carbon Yokohama has been declared already ahead of other cities. We have a lot of different initiatives to achieve this target. I would like to introduce some of them today. As you can see to the left, bottom side, the GHG emission peaked in 2013, and we have a steady pathway towards the declining emission in Yokohama. Next slide, please. So this is what I wanted to introduce to you. This is about renewable energy, and this is about working with other cities in Japan. According to our estimate, as of 2050, the renewable energy that can be produced within the city is only 10% of the necessary consumption. That's why we have a partnership with a city that is 700 kilometers away from the city of Yokohama. We have this agreement with this city, which has an abundant renewable energy. And we are already receiving supply from this city. Next, please. This is to introduce to you our collaboration with businesses and companies. This is what we call Yokohama Smart City Project. For 5 years until 2014, we worked together with energy-related businesses, electric equipment manufacturers, and etc. 34 of those businesses to have this demonstration, which actually was implemented inside the city. And with this demonstration, we were able to achieve the CO2 reduction of 30%, which actually exceeded our target. And then we continued to work with a variety of companies, and we are now discussing how to introduce independent, self-reliant energy source while reducing the CO2. And we would like to, at the same time, improve the disaster protection. Next, please. This is about international cooperation that we are focusing on in the city of Yokohama. CNCA and ICLEI and C40, these are cities network which are working on the reduction in earnest. We are working together with them to make a proposal to the government and also to the international community. Talking about EU, Frankfurt and Barcelona, we have exchanges of information with these cities. And in terms of Asian cities, we have a program to support businesses which are making inroads into Asian cities. For instance, Bangkok in Thailand, through JICA, we have dispatched experts from the city of Yokohama, and based on the climate master plan, we are supporting the city of Bangkok with technical aspect. And the moderator of today, Mr. Karo, is very helpful in this endeavor. Next, please. Next, please. Thank you. So that's what I've just introduced to you. This is about our support program of the Bangkok in Thailand. To the right, you see the staff members of the city of Yokohama. We welcome the people from Thailand. Next, please. Next, please. Now I'd like to talk about the impact of the new coronavirus. We aim to become a tourism city and a MICE city. Therefore, we've been affected greatly by the coronavirus spread. How can we recover our economy while suppressing the infection? This is a very important challenge going forward for the city. Next, please. we are selected as SDG's future city before the coronavirus spread. Businesses inside the city were very much interested in SDGs, and they were very eager to start a variety of initiatives and actions. So we had such a very positive momentum. But because of the coronavirus, and 99% of our businesses are small to medium-sized businesses, and they did not have any room for working on SDGs any longer. Therefore, we decided to have some kind of support and subsidiaries to be provided to these businesses in order to recover the economy under this coronavirus spread, to have good virtuous cycle of environment and economy, and how to have green recovery. I think SDG is already an important growth strategy for all the businesses, and they need to be aware of it. Next, please. Ms. Segawa already introduced this initiative by the central government. The Ministry of the Environment, together with the UNFCCC Secretariat, organized this online ministerial meeting, and the city of Yokohama Mayor Hayashi sent out a message through the video. Thank you very much for that opportunity. And our messages were as follows. We called for more collaboration among different cities. And half of the global population reside inside cities. Therefore, the role to be played by the cities is ever more important, and the importance is increasing. And the city of Yokohama wants to fulfill this mission at the forefront. That is all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The initiatives taken by the city of Yokohama are quite impressive. And today, too, we heard from her the new activities into this new year amid the coronavirus pandemic. So we would like to have a questions and answer sessions with the speakers. As for the questions, if you have the there are questions that we have already prepared from the host of this organizer of this symposium. We also take some of the questions from the participants who sent us the questions through the chat functions. We also received some questions prior to this webinar. So those of you who have the questions, please use the chat function to send us a question. First, this is a question for Ms. Segawa. So you explain about the online platform, which I believe received a lot of favorable comments, and the Mr. Waxman you refer to the importance of maintaining the momentum, but he also referred to the raising transparency and also providing the opportunity for sharing information among the countries. And that was also a very important role played by the online platform, I believe. But in this regard, can I ask you to make some comments? Thank you very much. Thank you very much for a very good question, Jacob. And there are three things that we realized after this online platform. One of them is that the NDC and the long-term strategies, which are the mechanism of the Paris Agreement, and then we need to have the mechanism in place which are consistent with the Paris Agreement. So the Paris Agreement is a guideline for us. And I think we are now sharing this slide. As of today, more than 70 countries have submitted their information about their activities on this platform. And this information is access-free, and anyone can access that information. So in terms of their transparency and accountability, I think this platform has given one answer in those two regards. And next is a review of the countries and policies, especially the further deployment of renewables in terms of the energy policy, and especially the deployment of hydrogen as early as possible, and social implementation of hydrogen. And also, and there was a reference to the increasing of the delivery and the increase of the transport by the Mr. Landau. So we need to electrify such transport. As Stockholm City pointed out, in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, we have seen the increase in the delivery, home delivery. And in order to respond to such issue, we are thinking of some ideas came out that we need to have the subsidies to the delivery trucks, which to be electrified. And the third issue is that the collaboration with non-state actors, and this is a must. And the local municipalities are very powerful partners. And also the potential of the communities should be deployed to the extent possible. So the voices from the communities and the decisions from the communities should be reflected in the policies. And these are the ideas which were sent to this online platform. And a lot of countries and the various international organizations are quite interested in this kind of information sharing. So we'd like to further share such information at different fora. Thank you. Thank you very much for a very interesting comment, especially because of the coronavirus pandemic. And you know, we are now living in very uncertain times, but there are some countries which have acted very early, and now the Japanese government is trying to link all those initiatives in different countries, and how we can overcome these two crises of the coronavirus pandemic and also the climate change. And it's important that we generate this sense of solidarity. So this information sent through the online platform is very much to be shared. And so we have high expectations for the online platform's roles. Next, Mr. Worksman, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. And in the presentation, you talked about the climate neutrality for Europe. That is a goal for Europe, you said. And especially the climate neutrality should be attained while pursuing the economic prosperity. And I believe that there were a lot of discussions among the member states to come up with this policy. Are these initiatives that Europe is pursuing going to be impacted by the coronavirus pandemic, or it would not be impacted in principle? And also, as for the international cooperation policy of the EU, what about the EU's assistance to the developing countries in terms of the coronavirus pandemic, as well as this climate change? That was the question.
Thanks very much for the question. Well, yes, I tried to emphasize the point in my presentation that this commission came out with a vision, the European Green Deal, based on the logic that this was the best way of ensuring that the European Union as an economy and as a society invested in a transition from where we are now to a carbon neutral economy as a way of growing jobs, as a way of increasing our competitiveness internationally, as a way of delivering benefits to our population in terms of cleaner air and more reliable transportation, more energy security, but also as a contribution to our commitment to achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. All of this logic, we have discovered, remains entirely intact when you begin to think about how to recover from the COVID crisis. So we have committed, as many others who participated in the Japanese online platform, to ensuring that green recovery, that recovery from COVID is green. It is, I think, in some ways, helped to focus minds on what it means to build back better by bringing the logic of the Green Deal together with the COVID-19 recovery. With regard to support to developing countries, the European Union is the most significant provider of climate finance, as you may know, as the combination between the EU budget and the budget of our member states provides tens of billions of euros in climate finance every year to help developing countries. We are looking now at the requests for support that we're getting from our developing country partners in the COVID context, and trying to see whether or not the same logic that worked in the EU, the Build Back Better logic, works with their national planning processes as well. And for many of them, we are seeing that same alignment of logic. So we hope with the latest budget that's been approved by the EU, as well as the resources that are provided by member states, to be able to maintain that level of climate finance that we've been providing in the past, and to do it in an even smarter and more strategic way in the context of the COVID recovery. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Next, I'd like to ask a question to Mr. Landa from Stockholm. In 2040, you will become climate positive, not using fossil fuels any longer. You've made that declaration. In order to pursue this initiative, and as you have touched upon already, citizens of Stockholm and also businesses with economic activities will be quite greatly affected by this target, which means you need to have proactive participation of all these stakeholders. You need to have engagement of those stakeholders. How do you ensure such engagement? How to come to a consensus? How to work on this target as a community as a whole? Anything we can learn from you?
Well, maybe you can learn something from us. We have a climate pact, which has been existing since 2008, I believe, 12 years. We've had the climate pact, where some 200 of the companies or businesses in the city of Stockholm have also worked in the same direction, saying that they will at least meet the same climate goals as the city is pursuing. So they're very much on board, and they really want to show off and show that they're doing at least as well as the city. Then if you look at the political view on the climate work, there is really no big difference between the different majorities that rule the city. People always want to change majority at every election, but the new politicians are still very much pro the climate work and are going further all the time. So we have a great political support. Then, of course, we work a lot with the public. We work with the schools, because often it's the children that educate their parents, and not only Greta Thunberg, but normally as well. And so we've approached the schools and worked with a lot of information campaigns there as well. So I believe we have a very strong support. The big issue, the big challenge once again, is transport. I don't think that everyone can afford within just a few years to go over from their already well-working car to an electric vehicle. Not everyone can afford buying electric vehicles in a very short term, so we have to work with other alternatives as well, even though we see that electrification probably solves most of the problems more than the biofuel, but we need the biofuels in the mid-term. And there we have to help people finding what is the least expensive way to move over from the fossil fuels they're using today.
Thank you very much. So I think these are all very good initiatives, and you are working on many different fronts. I think that itself is very important. So we have a question from the audience about involving the youth, kids, children. They educate their parents. We need to raise awareness amongst the children. A certain knowledge can be transmitted from the school, from the kids to their families and homes. That is a very important initiative as well. Next question goes to Yakushiji-san. As you said, the city of Yokohama is at the forefront of many different initiatives. Probably in Japan as well as in Asia, the city of Yokohama is really at the forefront, and it's not just making proposals, but they are implementing their actions. Where does this drive and energy comes from? In order to motivate the people, I'm sure that the staff members of the city council, they are very well motivated, but of course you have to have support from the citizens as well as the businesses which reside within the city. Can you touch upon this aspect? Yes. So we are at the forefront. Where does that motivation come from? The role and the mission of a local government is to work with citizens and businesses in terms of implementation. So zero carbon declaration was made by the city ahead of others. And in order to work together, we first have to share the sense of urgency and also the goal at the same time. And talking about the goal, this has to be simple. This has to be well understood and realistic. In order to implement our goal, we set a quite ambitious target and work together with the citizens to achieve that target. So that was the meaning of the zero carbon declaration. And well, Mr. Segawa is here, but compared to the Western countries, Japan may not be good at having bold steps or implementing bold policies. But it's very important for local governments to encourage such momentum so that the central government can also be motivated to make a bold step forward. And I think more than anything, people's consensus comes first. And for that, we would like to play our part. And finally, I'd like to say this. We, the city of Yokohama, consumes a lot of energy, but at the same time, we have a Bay Area which actually supply energy to the metropolitan area of Japan, which means that Yokohama is not very well positioned to become zero carbon. That is why we need to have decarbonization innovation and the city of Yokohama to lead such innovation. that is absolutely necessary for the city of Yokohama to be decarbonized. That's why we are at the forefront to initiate innovation and also trigger investment and attract more innovation and investment to Yokohama. Thank you. Thank you very much. So it's not as if you are just calling for actions, but you are actually implementing these actions. That's very important. And that is probably the indicator of the importance of local government working on the ground. We are coming towards the end of this session, so I'd like to ask each speaker to give us the final message. We heard from the Japanese speakers as well as the EU speakers about their initiatives under this corona crisis. There are certain things that were considered quite difficult, but that are proven to be quite consistent with the climate change actions. And by pursuing those initiatives, we may be able to open up the new future. That's a kind of learning under this corona crisis. So towards the audience or towards the future audience who may take a look at this on-demand video in the future, I would like to have each speaker to give us the final message. Segawa-san? Okay, so the message. I wonder what to say, what to send out as a message. But Ms. Yakushiji said implementation is very important, and I think this can be a very good message. And also to incorporate the youth opinions, voices of the youth, and we are actually receiving those youth voices towards the pre-COP next year. We, the Ministry of the Environment, is now thinking about how to incorporate the voices of the youth. And this is also to do with the implementation. The government offices and organizations in Japan, they may be very conservative. We are not very good at implementing new policies, as pointed out by Ms. Yakushiji. However, local governments and other stakeholders working together with them. And I think the Ministry of the Environment of Japan has a certain flexibility in terms of working with those other stakeholders. So please approach us and let's come up with the future direction on the level of implementation together. And thank you very much for your great support, OECC. And we would like to work together with the EU in terms of the implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Waxman.
Thanks. Well, first of all, a message of gratitude for the organizers and for my fellow panelists. It was a very, very interesting, stimulating conversation. I think those of us who live in cities in the course of the COVID crisis shared an experience around the world when suddenly the city was quiet, the air was sweeter, people were cycling and walking when they were allowed to. And there was a moment where that sense of solidarity, of working in the same direction, brought this unexpected co-benefits of people taking choices that were less carbon intensive, leaving their cars in the garage and finding other ways of getting around. What we're experiencing now in Brussels as things return to some level of normality is all the cars are back. And I think what this shows us is that we do need to think harder about how we can encourage changes in behavior that are more long-lasting in nature. And we really will look to leadership from local authorities to help us to tackle those really challenging aspects of emissions reductions that colleagues have mentioned on this call today. Renovating buildings, a very big part of what we'll need to get our emissions down, particularly in Europe. That depends very heavily on local authorities, local planning standards, et cetera. Improving public transportation, absolutely essential. Ensuring things like opportunities for rooftop renewables, critical to local authority decisions and planning. So Cities are a great source of hope and optimism. They're also a significant source of emissions. And so I think we continue to have to work together through these multi-level governance approaches to make sure that, that we're all moving towards the same goals. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Landa.
Yes. Well, first of all, what I think I showed was that we have been able to reduce our emissions by about 50%, even though the city's population has grown. We have done this while achieving an even quicker economic development. We can see that the reduction of emissions, the increase in economic development, maybe they go hand in hand. So this has been a part of our economic development. We have to see this as a possibility, but we also have to be very aware that the last part of getting down to zero will be much more complicated than these first parts. And we have to very much address, together with other levels of government, the remaining challenges where we have to work together in a much more intense way to be able to address these. I've also been very happy to be part of this panel, and I found very much interest in the other presentations as well. I hope all the presentations will be available afterwards as well, because I think I can use this and show some of my colleagues as well. So thank you very much for letting me join.
Thank you very much. So, Yakushi-san, last part, please. Thank you very much for this opportunity today. So recovery from the coronavirus pandemic is really a big, tough challenge. But on the other hand, the responsible behavior of individuals is very important. And also the interest in sustainability has also been heightened because of this coronavirus pandemic. And this is a co-benefit from the pandemic, especially in the next 10 years until 2030, our actions will be critical in terms of the climate change. That's the alarm sounded by all the experts in the world. So we would like to exert our utmost efforts so that we can achieve our goals, and we'd like to continue to collaborate with different actors. So I look forward to continue to work with you. Thank you very much. Arigatou gozaimashita. Thank you very much. And so we heard the messages from the four speakers and the participants who are watching this real time, and also those who are watching this on demand later. I hope that you all take the lessons learned and use them in your own activities. And there are still many people who are suffering from the coronavirus and COVID-19, and we cannot be complacent yet, and how we can overcome from this crisis, and also how we can open the ways towards the future, and how we can increase our initiatives and activities toward the climate neutrality. It's very important. As for the presentations of the panelists today, we will be uploading them on the website of this webinar series. And I hope that this kind of discussion will continue in Europe and in Japan and on different levels. And with that note, thank you very much for your participation, and we would like to close this webinar. Thank you very much.